That's more my. Rabbi Rohr. Kenny, can you hand me the wire there? Thank you.
Yes, we did.
It's because till now the only way you were able to judge Milwaukeeans is by Chaim Pinsky. So you probably think that all Milwaukeeans are a little bit odd, but Kenny will restore our reputation. What happened to our other Yitzchak? That's what it sounded.
You.
Huh?
1 year.
Yitzchak.
I had a question before. I said, just go over.
Just go right here.
4 points of rule that you mentioned yesterday. What each one was.
Okay.
This time we can write it down. Like just
Did you go jogging today?
I got 2 of them last night. I thought there were 2. I was talking about
very beautiful.
Okay, so I'll repeat them.
1 second, before the radio repeats, I'm going to catch up.
Okay, so yesterday at Shalosh Shudas, I spoke about the 4 expressions of Geula for which, or corresponding to which we drink the 4 KSYs on Pesach night by the Seder. So they are I will take you out from beneath the burdens of Egypt, and I will rescue you from your servitude, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgment, and I will take you unto me as a nation. So I mentioned the fact that the Maharal uses these as 4, he says they reference 4 phases of Geula, which correspond to the 4 expressions of Galus, which Hashem told Avram Avinu at the Bris Bein Absarim. So he said to him, Yodoya Teda ki gir yezaracha be'eretz lelohem va'avodim v'inu esam. So the Maharal says that those represent 4 levels, each one worse than the next. The first one is your children will be strangers. So he says that means even in Eretz Yisrael, they will be treated like strangers. Be'eretz leilahem, the second phase is that they will be banished from their land, and they will be strangers in a strange land. The third level is va'avadim, they will be in servitude. That doesn't necessarily yet imply that it will be painful. But the fourth level is ve'inu esam, they will be oppressed. So he said that each one of these expressions of Geula corresponds to these phases, and they will in reverse order. So the first thing is that they will reverse the ve'inu, the affliction, and the second one would be servitude, v'galti osam eschem. V'itzalti eschem mi'avidosam from. And then Galti Eschem would be they would take them out of that strange land. Kakti Eschem Lile'am would be that they would return actually Oretz would be the return. Anyway, but that's the mahalach of the Maharal, that these four expressions of Geula correspond to the four levels of Golus. So, but I suggested something else. I proposed that that some of the most painful things that we see when people come to us with their personal issues correspond to these four different kinds of anguish. So one of them is where people talk about the fact that they feel that their lives are empty. They're on this. They're in the rat race, and they're constantly busy, but they don't feel that there's meaning or purpose to their lives. That they're making a difference. That they're making a contribution. So, when Klal Yisrael were initially, when they were taken with the design to begin to oppress them, so the Pari said, there, "Evido Isam beforach," that they worked them with, and it's translated in English, I think, as rigor. But Avodas Perach is back-breaking work. So, Avidu Mitzrayim, as when it's called Befarech. So the Medrash says that when it says over here that they made them build, even Ari Miskinos the Parias Pisem Bas Ramses, that Pisem and Ramses represent. They do some sort of etymological analysis of those two words, and they mean the fact that when Klal Yisrael would put up these buildings to serve as storehouses for Egypt, that they would watch these buildings disintegrate, or that they would watch them sink into the ground, so that that there was a futility to what they were doing. You know, they put in all of this effort and all of this work, and at least if at the end of it, there's something that, in a certain sense, that's a monument to what you've done. So you have some sense that you made a difference, you left something in the world, but they just watched all of this fall apart. There's a story that tell about someone who was imprisoned and pleaded with his captors that they should give him something to do. So they made a hole in the wall, and they put in a long pole with a kind of a wheel that you turned, and they said to him, "You'll turn this wheel, and that will bring water to the land outside, and we'll plant a garden there, and you'll be watering this garden." So he would spend hours every day turning this thing, and then he would be thinking about, the garden and the things that were growing there. So when he finally got out after several years, he got out from prison. So he walked out. He asked his captors if they would take him around so they could see the garden that he had made grow, and they showed him that at the end of the pole there was nothing. There was no water, there was nothing, and that the land was barren, and he collapsed and died. And that was because he felt that everything that he had done was worthless. So he had just wasted his life. But not infrequently, I hear this anguish from people that they feel, they're on this thing that, this wheel that what do they call those things? Huh? A hamster wheel. Yeah. Huh? So, and they're just kind of going around and around, and huh?
Treadmill?
No, it's like a wheel like that. It goes around and around, and nothing happens. You know, you're just on this wheel. You're in the same place, and you feel, and they feel that their life is kind of meaningless. So it's an enormous sense of pain to people, and that's what Klal Yisrael felt in Egypt. And Rabbi Michel said to him, that kind of crushing life, and what that corresponds in our experience is that there are altogether too many people in our experience who, even if they're not coming to complain about it, but that's what they're feeling. So that's one area that requires redemption. Then the second one is servitude, and servitude over there was pretty clear what that servitude was. They had no life. They were constantly doing what some other force put upon them. And in our experience, servitude could be alcohol, could be drugs, could be gambling, could be pornography, could be workaholics. But they're all forms of servitude. They're all forms of people who are completely immersed in something which has obliterated any other quality or meaning in life, and it's usually meant as a distraction from what a person feels they're not capable of doing. They can't fill their lives with anything that's really meaningful, and the result is that in an effort to cope with that either that feeling of helplessness or that feeling of there's a vacuum inside of them, and nature abhors a vacuum, so it's got something. The person has to do something. So they'll do anything to distract them from their pain, and that is the second issue of Vitzalti eschem mi'avidosam. I will save you from your servitude, and that again we have to be aware of the extent to which we have dependencies in order to feel alive. So when people drink, they feel alive. When people take drugs, they feel alive. When people eat, they feel alive. But they're all attempts to slake some kind of a very profound emptiness inside of themselves. So we see that. We see people who suffer from, in one level or another, they're in servitude to something. The third one is Ugalti Eschem Yisrael Netu Vishvatim Gedalim. So a third type of hurt that we see not infrequently are people who, rightfully or wrongfully, it doesn't make much difference whether or not they're entitled to it, but they feel unloved. They feel that they don't matter to anybody. I'm sure that Rabbi Avram, you've seen much of this, and Ellie's probably seen much of it. I mean, the people feel it don't make a difference to anybody. So that could be because they may in fact be have suffered from some very dysfunctional parenting, and they weren't loved, and they in fact grew up with this very painful feeling that nobody cares about them, and nobody would stand up for them. They have no champion. We've seen a little bit of that since we're here, and some of the people that we talked to. Boy. And the Bnei Yisrael in Mitzrayim, it said Vayakutsu. Vayakutsu mipnei Bnei Yisrael. The Egyptians were repulsed by them. So when people feel that they have no champion, feel people that nobody will stand up for them, they don't feel loved or precious to anybody, it becomes an enormous burden for them, an enormous source of anguish. So the third type of geula is Ga'alti Aschem B'Zrei Netuya. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm that Hashem says, I'm gonna embrace you. I'm gonna reach out to you, and I'm gonna hug you. U'Shvatim Gedolim, and I will stand up for you. I'll be your. I'll see to it that no one will take advantage of you. Somebody, my son Yaakov Moshe was a rabbi in Monsey, and has become much in demand as a speaker at a lot of different tzedakah organizations. So he spoke this past week for an organization that that provides services for orphans. So he told the following story, which may be a story that you already know, but it was new to me. One of the Brisker Rosh Yeshiva, one of the Brisker Yeshivas, Rabbi Avram Yeshia, was in an ambulance with his father, who was dying. His father was Rebbeinu Soloveitchik. He died a relatively young man. So Rabbi Michel was with him in the ambulance, and this Rebbeinu said to his son, he said to him, I want to tell you a story. He said in Brisk, there was a Melamed who on one occasion took his Talmidim out for an excursion. They went out somewhere into the country. So two boys got into a fight. So one of the boys ran over to the Melamed and said to him, he accused the other boy of starting up with him. The Melamed went over to the other boy and he administered some physical punishment. So there was another boy there by the name of Yosef, and this other little boy, this Yosef, went over to the Melamed and said to him, how could you do that? He said, you beat up Yankel, and you didn't even listen to what Yankel had to say about what went on in this fight. So the Melamed said to him, Yankel is an orphan. the other boy is not an orphan. If I beat up this other boy, then I have to deal with his parents. He said, so I decided I'll punish Yanko, and nobody's gonna bother me about him. This little boy Yosef came home, said to his father, I'm not going back to this Malamed anymore. He's not going to teach me. And he told his father what happened, and he said, this is out of question. So his father had to teach him himself. So his father became his Malamed. Not too long afterwards, this Yosef became very ill, to the point where they called the Chevra Kadisha to be at his bedside because he was a goses. So their Chevra Kadisha are sitting around his bed, and they're saying Tehillim, and all of a sudden he wakes up and he asks for a glass of water. So they bring a glass of water, and he says to them, you can go home, I'm going to live. He said, well, I need some days just to rest. And he slept for the next several days. And then he finally woke up, and he got up, and he told his parents that he was in fact about to die, and he saw himself in front of the Beis Din Shel Maalah, who said that whatever cheshbon was, that his time had come. So he said, just then, he said, Beryl the blacksmith appeared before the Beis Din Shel Maalah and said, you cannot take this child's life. He stood up for my son who was an orphan. He stood up for him. He deserves to live just in the merit of that, of standing up for him. So the Beis Din Shel Maalah recognized that it was a good taina, and they passed him that he should live. So he said, when they passed him I should live, he said, I woke up and I knew that I was going to live, so then I just needed to rest up. So Rebel, the Brisker, Rosh Yeshiva, was telling his son, Rabbi Yeshua, the current Rosh Yeshiva, he said to him, that Yosef turned out to be Rabbi Yosef Doiv Soloveitchik, the Beis HaLevi. He turned out to be the Beis HaLevi, he said, and because he stood up for a Yosam, he founded the whole Beis Brisk, everything, the Briskerov, and all the everything that we have today, he said, is a result of the fact that this little Yosel stood up for a Yosem. So this Rebbe said to Rabbi Michel, he said, I know, he said, I'm on my way out. He said, but he said, I just don't have a schus like this. What am I going with? I don't have a schus like this, like his grandfather, Yeshua. In any event, so the third category of redemption is to help, someone to redeem people, when people feel that they don't matter and they're not precious to anyone. There's nobody to stand up for them. There's no shvatim gedolim. There's no zreya nituya that the Rabbi Michel said for Klal Yisrael. At that time, he said to him, and somehow we have to find ways of addressing that issue with the people who are anguished, who hurt that deeply when they come to us with their heavy hearts. And the truth of the matter is, I think if we look around, I suggested yesterday that while most people don't have all of these four problems in
What's the fourth one?
what?
We're not there.
But everything's on a spectrum. When I was in graduate school for clinical psych, and we did abnormal psych, everything that every category of abnormal psych, I decided I suffered from. I was, I was depressed and I was paranoid. What?
There's nothing more dangerous than learning the diagnostic manual.
Well, but the point is that it's really a spectrum. It's like there are times that everybody is a little bit depressed, and there are times that everybody's a little bit paranoid. Abnormal psych means it's abnormal, but there are normal expressions, the kind of things that people kind of get over. So all these categories are pretty much I think, common amongst us in one degree or another. Anyway, the fourth category was people who don't have a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, and that's serious because there's really something which is, I think, part of all of us, which requires a connection with the eternal. The fact that in one way or another we are all conscious, or at least at some level we're conscious of our mortality, is not insignificant in the way in which it manifests itself in how we wake up in the morning and how we live our lives. And there are many things that occupy our attention during the course of the day where we're investing time and energy in, and they're moribund. They're all somehow, we know that they're, in one way or another, that they are not connected to the eternal. They're not timeless. We also sense that the only way for us to overcome that is to be connected to something eternal. And we sense, I think, we do sense that there is something inside of us that has that capacity. There's, whether or not we understand that what the neshama is, but there is something deep inside of us that feels that there is something that's immortal and that transcends our mortality, but we don't have a handle on it. We don't feel connected. So the fact that people are struggle with how to feel connected. I had a famous story about a child who approaches his father and says, "How do we know there's a God?" So the father says, "I can't tell you, and I'll explain it to you." So several days later, he says to the father says to the child, it's a beautiful, it's a great day today for flying a kite. So let's go, and we'll fly a kite. So they go out to fly a kite, and they get the kite really up high, and soon it's obscured by a low hanging cloud. So the father says to the child, "Is the kite still up there?" So he says, "Yeah, Dad, if I talk to you." He said, "Well, how do you know?" He said, "Well, I can feel the tug on the string." So he said, "Well, that's how we know that there's a God, there's a tug on the string." But a lot of people don't feel the tug on the string. So that fourth category of people who feel somehow disconnected, Rabbi Michel says, I'll take you to me. I'll make sure that you feel connected. So these are all very challenging things, and to help people address their addictions or the different levels of Sivleis Mitzrayim, to help people deal with their level of Abdus help people deal with their sense of futility. It helps in people deal with their sense of being unappreciated or unloved. To help people deal with the fact that they feel disconnected they're not uncommon, and maybe in some measure or another we kind of all struggle with little manifestations of those issues. But on Pesach night, we drink 4 cups to celebrate the fact that we have potentially we have ways of freeing ourselves from those issues. So that's what I tried to say yesterday. I don't know whether I came across clearly, but that's what.
The question is if you, that means to say if you believe that all these things that you should be okay. In other words, if we believe everything, that God's there to hug us and God's there to make our life meaningful, if you believe that means you don't need anything else. It means that's not, I mean, a lot of people struggle. It's not just about Avodas Hashem. I mean, where do we take this?
I don't think those are the only, those 4 categories are the only
But I'm saying, let's say
challenges that we face.
Let's take these 4 categories, so where do we go with that? I mean, we're not.
Drink a 5th cup of wine.
No, where do we go?
You go to Rabbi Avram, you go to Eli, you make an appointment.
I mean, but you see it, but where do we really go? I mean, if we believe in God and we're really about Hashem, we should be okay, right? We shouldn't have any.
We shouldn't have any problems.
God redeems all these issues.
Should we be
We would be solid, we should be solid and everything. I mean, maybe that's the case, I don't know.
Shmuel.
I wouldn't relate to it.
I'm thinking of the distinction between, the individual Jew and the national Jewish people. So on an individual level, there are Jews that don't have anybody, they don't have a parent. And then you have, Boys Town and Girls Town, and you have chesed organizations that look after the individual as a person. And that's what we're here for. We're here to look out for each other. At a national level, we don't have anybody to look out for each other. We're going to rely on the UN. We're going to rely on even the United States. So I was just wondering, is this why at the national level we are so estranged? Because there is nobody else to look for except to God on a national level. Is there a difference between the individual and the national, like the nation of Israel as a people? Where as a people, we really are more downtrodden than the individual. As a nation, we're worse off than we are as individual people, I think.
I think it's the opposite. I think as a nation, because as far as individuals, we all struggle.
That's what he's saying, that if we have,
He's saying
that if
we're
we
worse
know
off
that
as a
the
nation.
Rebbeinu is watching over us on a national level, so we don't really, even though we do understand how estranged we are, how alienated we are, or how rejected we are, but
As a people, we're doing great, but when you look at, you look at the playground, we don't have any friends. And as the older I get, I'm not bothered as much with what the UN says, because we've got God, so say whatever you want.
okay, good. So that's it.
So,
A lot of people, by the way, don't. I mean, for them this is kind of strange. I grew up. I went to public school. I was a little kid with pass, who the game were always interested in beating the daylights out of. They were always interested in beating me up. And
That
I
explains a
grew
lot
up.
of that
I grew up.
abnormal thing.
What?
That explains a lot of things.
And he has recorded that.
It explains my paranoid, right? There was once a university professor in the University of Wisconsin who he never really became the Kurv, but he became very, very close. He was kind of almost like a member of the family. So once, when my father's Blach was in the hospital, so the hospital was like an hour walk from where we lived, and he was in the hospital on Shabbos, so I wanted to walk to check in on him on Shabbos. So this professor volunteered to walk with me. I mean, he grew up in a very, very, genteel, the kind of liberal environment. So he believed that that everybody was, the world was a terrific place, and Jews were, part of this terrific place. So you had to walk through a neighborhood that wasn't the best neighborhood in the world. Well, as we walked through the neighborhood, you were subjected to, he wasn't wearing a shtreimel, but I was obviously very Jewish. So they called out all kinds of epithets that were, to put it mildly, not particularly generous, and threw things at us, like garbage, apple cores, all kinds of stuff. I mean, he was traumatized. It was the first time in his life, and he was, at this point, he was in his mid-40s, that he had ever experienced anti-Semitism. So I grew up with it. So to me, with the UN, or whether it's on an individual basis, I'm not particularly sensitive to anymore, because it's just, to me, that's kind of the way of the world. I kind of expect it.
The David Melech grew up, everyone thought he was a momzer.
Right.
Right, and he got that constantly, and it never left him all his life. He always was.
Right, he was the one who was rejected.
And he became David Melech. And what you just said.
But he left us a legacy of things to say when we feel rotten. He left us a legacy of things to say when we feel rotten.
But I wanted to say also about the Yidden in Mitzrayim, and with all these things they felt alone, and this, that, and the other thing, their wives were coming out with their mirrors to seduce them, and they were having sextuplets one after the other.
Right.
I mean, how could they feel unproductive and uncared for?
I mean, right now, I think that the fact that the Torah recorded these things in a way which allows us to, kind of find ourselves in it is what's important. Exactly whether what Klal Yisrael was experiencing at the time is secondary to what the Torah wants us to understand from what was going on. By the way, if you know women who've had sextuplets, if you know women who've had sextuplets, or families who've had sextuplets, then they feel very productive, but they're also exhausted.
Yeah.
I have a granddaughter who had quadruplets, who has quadruplets, and when her brother called her up to wish her mazel tov, so she said to him, "Are you jealous of me?" He said, "If I would have quintuplets, I would be jealous." But he said.
By the way, I want to say, by the way, my oldest grandchild is bar mitzvah today.
Oh, mazel tov, mazel tov.
I mean, you saw me coming from Madison. I should be zocha to.
Nobody would have at that time would have been able to project that. Baruch Hashem. Yes, sir.
I was just curious if you had any thoughts about the fifth concept of Gula, of the Heveti. Does that fit into what your experience has been here, or any of the models that?
I think that Ve'iveti is a universal. These other things may not be so universal, but Ve'iveti is universal. They tell a story that after the war, after the last World War, that there was a family, they were traveling from place to place looking for some place to make, to settle in. So they're in a train station. So they're the parents and some children and a lot of suitcases. And it's clear that they're refugees. So somebody walks over to the little girl and says to her, "It must be really hard not to have a home." And this little girl very wisely replied, "Oh, no," she said, "we have a home. We just don't have a house to put it in." It probably goes back to the first banishment when Adam Rishon is driven out of Gan Eden. But I think that there is something in all of us that wants to go home. And there's certainly something that people will tell you, that when they come to Eretz Yisrael, people in Chutz La'aretz, when they come to Eretz Yisrael, that something inside of them moves in a way which touches a very deep chord, and they feel that they've come home. And these are people who aren't particularly observant in any meaningful way, but when they step on Eretz Yisrael, so they feel that they've come home. And even though it's not quite ideal yet, but there is something about a connection between us and Eretz Yisrael which feels like we've come home. The truth is that until such time as we've somehow navigated our ability to complete the whole picture, so that it's not only that we're here, but we are connected, and we've discovered our particular place. Many of us are still trying to figure out. My Rebbetzin is always telling me that one of my problems is that I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. Yeah, a lot of people can, how does this thing go? I resemble that. So, so there is this, in a way, with the fact that we are, under the best of circumstances, there's something inside of us which still resonates to the term refugee. And until such time as we're really secure in Eretz Yisrael, and until such time as the nations of the world, back off and allow us to live in peace and to pursue our destiny, we're still refugees. So the Vehivesi is probably the most important of all of the. So that's the KSY Elio. That's the fifth cup. When Elio Novi will come and will announce the fact that the Yeshua is coming. We speak about menucha on Shabbos. And Shabbos is me'ein olam haba. So this concept of menucha, of peace, we speak menuchas hanefesh, Menuchas Haguf. When the verb in Hebrew, when you put something down, is lahaniach, right? You put it down. So something is munach, it's resting, which means it's in a place. Shabbos, in a certain sense, restores us because it removes us from this workaday week when where we're busy trying to take charge of our lives and sustain ourselves. And Shabbos is the day when we step back, we recognize that the world belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and that He's in charge. And hopefully, our lives on Shabbos are a little bit mi'ein olam haba. We're able to spend more time with our families. We're able to spend more time in tefillah or in Torah. It's supposed to be in terms of quality, a better time. So that's our place. That's really where we belong. The weekday is not our place. It's not really where we as a nation, where we belong. We're supposed to be this Mamleches Kehanim and a Goy Kodesh. We're supposed to be able to be immersed in things that unite us with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Menucha in Shabbos is an experience of homecoming. This is Shabbos in time is our place. Eretz Yisrael in space is our space. So we're not at home until we're at home in time, until we're at home in space, until we're at home within ourselves. We have to be able to find that we know where our place is in what we're doing with our lives. So when those three things come together, then we'll be at home. Vehevesi, that's that's Vehevesi.
Observations, there's a Sfas Emes, says that Hamakim is a Makim of Shiur, it's a protected place. And that's the quality of was telling Yerushalayim, we want to be protected, we want to have this menucha that you're talking about. When they're like a rose among the thorns, when Yisrael goes out, Yisrael goes out into the galus and goes out into the week and does the avoda with all and stands as fresh as they can, even with all the thorns that are coming off them. It says it's more important to Hashem that we're doing it that way.
Yeah.
Just one other quick thing I want to say about Shabbos. It says in the Zohar, every Shabbos, all the hashbaz of the coming week come down.
All the
Hashbaz of the coming week, all the spiritual influences of the week,
right.
Coming week come down. So I want to say from this, that the Shabbos before Mashiach comes, all the hashbaz of Mashiach are going to come down that Shabbos. We don't know when that's going to be, so every Shabbos we should have in mind that this could talk to be the Shabbos before Mashiach, and that we can be feeling
the Eretz of Geula.